So transforming mobility, I think that is something which is at the forefront of thinking across policymakers, across every citizen in the country, and very importantly, people who are making mobility solutions, whether it's in the form of vehicles, whether it's in the form of rapid transport systems like metros, etc. So road infrastructure plays a major role in on-surface transportation, both for goods and passenger traffic in India. I think the presentation's not coming on. Yeah, thank you. So while we have the second largest road network in the world, with 5.5 million kilometers of roads being out there, we also have a huge traffic on these roads, close to about 3,000 billion ton kilometer of freight that runs on these roads, about 18,000 billion passenger kilometers per annum that run on these roads. And the very interesting part is that 40% of this load is carried by 2% of roads in the country, which are the national highways. Also, road transport has been deteriorating over the years, or let me say, has not been able to keep pace with the increase in traffic. So what used to stand at about 53 per thousand vehicles, 53 kilometers per thousand vehicles about a decade and a half ago, is now come down to about 29 kilometers per thousand vehicles. Also in terms of quality of roads, we're down at about 55th in the world as per the World Economic Forum. Moving on, within our roads, again, road transport is a big challenge. There is a huge amount of congestion. So roads that may have a design speed of 50 to 70 kilometers per hour, the average speed in cities like Delhi comes down to about 26 kilometers per hour. And overall, about 12 hours in a day, the average speed is just about 25 to 30 kilometers in Delhi, which leads to highly inefficient city transport. So as you can see in these images, there is traffic, and there is also a huge amount of heterogeneity of traffic, which leads to zigzag driving, and also further adds to the congestion that exists on our roads. Another issue we have is around parking. So there is limited parking available in around, say, the public transit stations, like the metro stations, because of which people are sometimes not deeply inclined to take the first mile in their own car or two-wheeler and then hop onto a metro. There is also a subsidized tariff structure as far as parking is concerned. For example, for areas like Connaught Place in Delhi, the parking rates that are prevalent are highly subsidized. Also, there is a lack of parking facilities in residential areas, because of which a lot of parking happens on roads, thereby reducing the overall road length available for vehicles. And finally, and just as importantly, for the app-based taxi services, most of these taxi services tend to come, these cabs come to areas where they could get passengers easily in the peak hours. But there are no parking facilities for cabs in these areas. Therefore, they just keep on maneuvering around the roads or just stand on the sides of the roads, thereby severely adding to the congestion in peak hours. Buses are a popular mode of transport in India, but here again, when we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, we are not in a very good spot. In Thailand, for instance, there are about 8.6 buses per 1,000 people, South Africa about 6.5, US about 2.7, and we are just at 1.7 buses per 1,000 people. Also, BRTs have not been a tremendous success story in India, and only Ahmedabad and Gujarat being the two outliers in terms of BRT. Metro and monorail infrastructure is growing. However, the ridership as compared to several global cities is still less. If you compare it from Delhi, which has about 10,000 or 11,000 per kilometer, compared to Shanghai, where it's about 15,000, or Sao Paulo, with it's as high as 28,000 people. Besides this, there is also not a widespread metro network in cities other than Delhi, and there is also limited integration with other modes of transport. Along with this, I think the overall public transport challenges are there is poor infrastructure and not good on-time performance that is there. There are uncoordinated timetables that make people wait at every interconnection stop. Also, a ticket has to be bought each time you're changing from one mode to the other, which also leads to wastage of a lot of time. And finally, because there is no single authority to maintain and coordinate all this, therefore things do not improve at the pace that they need to. So what has all this led to? This has led to there being a mushrooming of two-wheelers on the roads. So of the 227 million vehicles running on roads, 3/4 are two-wheelers. And apart from this, there are many, many people who are using inefficient intermediate public transport like three-wheelers or overcrowded vans and then complete the rest of the journey on foot. This is because for such people, public transport is not affordable. And for the people who can afford it, the public transport is not as efficient. Therefore, a large section of people, both at the bottom strata and at the top strata, do not prefer public transport in our cities. Also, if we look at the air quality, it's a very well-known fact that we have cities which have some of the worst air quality when compared to other major cities in the world. But we got down to getting some more data on this, and an interesting thing came out. So if we look at the number of vehicles that are there in Delhi, Tokyo, London, and the road length that is there, we are not very different from these cities. So Delhi has about 176. This is based on registration data, vehicles per kilometer. Tokyo about 132, and London 220. However, when we look at the air quality index, it is very, very different. Delhi is at 457, which is hazardous, whereas Tokyo is 66 and London is 58. That clearly shows that there is some other source of this particulate matter pollution, and that largely is attributed to dust, whether it's construction dust or dust on the roads that's flying up, and also in some part to heavy commercial vehicles crisscrossing through the city of Delhi. What you can see on the right is some analysis around what contributes maximum to the dust pollution in our cities, and transport is not the biggest contributor. It's road and construction dust that is leading to most of this particulate matter pollution that is there. Also, in the last few years, we've seen, while the number of road accidents has come down, unfortunately, the severity of these accidents has gone up. And number of people killed in per 100 accidents is continuously increasing. It stands at about 31 as of 2016. However, some changes are happening in this direction. Also, vehicles are becoming more safer. Roads are being redesigned to make them safer. And also, some sort of measures around certification of driving is also going around. So therefore, what is needed? To be able to address all this, and there are some buzzwords out here that we need mobility that is safer, that is cleaner, that is more affordable, that is shared, and is also smart. But when we talk of all of this, several options come in front of us, as you can see on this slide. So, you have things as simple as making footpaths and walkways, and you have things like creating an intelligent traffic management system. Here, we have to be mindful about which measures are easier to implement and what sort of population do they impact. For example, there are a lot of people who are still walking a large part of their commute. Having proper footpaths and walkways for them will go a long way in ensuring that they can safely cross our roads, and the number of accidents that happen with pedestrians can actually come down. Similarly, having stringent measures for in-use vehicular pollution check can also go a long way in reducing pollution in our cities. Because today the PUC is just used as a token to tell the cop that I have a PUC. It's not really checked whether what sort of pollution is coming out of the car. Law enforcement is another one. Even if you compare, say, law enforcement in Delhi and a satellite city like Gurgaon, you will see differences. I think the authorities also need to do a deep dive and understand why such differences exist, and look at some cities which have better law enforcement of traffic, like Chandigarh, etc., and try and replicate those models across the rest of the country. Also, having non-motorized pathways for things like cycles or e-rickshaws would go a long way in reducing heterogeneity of speed on our roads, and thereby also reduce the zigzag traffic. So these are the things which are in the dark blue, but we also need the next leap in terms of making mobility cleaner, safer, and all of those things that I mentioned in the previous slide. Therefore, we look at the light blue area there. And here, amongst other things, we have electric vehicles, which has tremendous potential, but at the same time also needs a lot of efforts in terms of setting up the whole charging infrastructure, in terms of crossing over the mindsets of consumer acceptability, etc. Therefore, I think it's apt that today we have amongst us people who are at the forefront of electric mobility in the country to discuss and deliberate on what sort of imperatives are there to have electric mobility take up in a big way in the country. Thank you very much. Before I move on, I would also like to request the panelists to please unveil the knowledge report for this conference. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so moving on with the panel discussion, and I would like to start with Subi because you come from Yes Bank's, the think tank wing of Yes Bank, and therefore for electric mobility, from a macro standpoint, what do you think are the imperatives? And when I say that, looking at manufacturing, looking at financing, also looking at if making it more sustainable in the sense, like we have a 1 mega event going on here where we have solar, we have transport and other forms. So how can you bring it all together in the form of, sustainable electric mobility in the future?
Ashim. Asim, thank you very much for that presentation. I think that was fairly conclusive in terms of setting the agenda for this discussion. My name is Dr. Subi Chaturvedi, and when you look at Yes Bank, you normally look at funding options and financing the gaps between the cracks. I represent an unusual think tank which is located within a bank. I think that was a fairly comprehensive presentation which sets out the groundwork as to why we need to start thinking EV. When we look at the Yes Bank Global Institute, this is an institute that looks at 13 key sectors, and for us, sustainability, mobility, and responsible banking and smart cities are very critical. So your presentation set out the ground rules as to why we need to start looking at this unique conundrum, which is India. It is the queen of paradoxes, and mobility and livelihoods are two very critical aspects. So what is it that brings us to smarter cities? What is it that brings us to urban cities? And then the context of EVs. I will restrict my intervention to about 5 minutes and then happy to take this conversation forward. When the government set out the goal in 2015 and made the announcement that we need to start looking at a faster adoption of mobility and electric vehicles, there were quite a few challenges staring at us in the face. So we set out a very ambitious target of about 7 million vehicles by 2020. Presently, we're looking at somewhere around 2 lakh vehicles. We've got some industrious colleagues on the panel who are actually making this happen as we speak from the outside and look at what is the kind of ecosystem that we can provide to them and to ourselves and enable the government as to how we can make this happen. So when we started out looking at the macro, let's say 40,000 feet view above the ground, a bird's eye view, we looked at countries that had made it happen. And that has told us that it needs a mix of a carrot and stick treatment. You need the government to not just incentivize or let's say allocate 795 crores for EVs specifically, but also tell us what is it that we can do as stakeholders, the private sector, citizens and the community, the policymakers, the bureaucrats, the manufacturing units, and above all, we also need to look at it from a developing country, emerging economy perspective, because there is no one-size-fits-all. So there are countries who've made a success of it, and that has taken a lot of policy incentives, not just in terms of monetizing, and I'll come to that very quickly, but in terms of also stipulating a stricter format where they're saying access to gasoline vehicles will be only done through a lottery, and that can mean a wait time of over 6 to 7 years. So therefore, people are choosing in cities in China where this has been successful, let's say Shanghai, Beijing, Hangzhou, Guangzhou, where they're saying, I'd rather not wait for this long, and I'd much rather opt for an EV. which again is a far more expensive proposition because technologies come at a price. So if you're looking at a car that may cost you upwards of 35,000 USD, then that is a daunting proposition. But what is great and affirming is we've got colleagues on the panel who made it happen for us at much lesser prices. So what is it that is still stopping us? Are worried that they may not be long range enough, are worried that they may take longer in charging. So if you're looking at an output where you have to charge a vehicle for 15 hours or 14 hours to get a 3-hour run, that inversion now has started happening in cities and states where, let's say California, for example, when there's not just research and development that is looking at smarter charging technologies, that would take lesser than 15 minutes to give you a 14-hour run. These are the smart chargers. With that, they're also looking at incentivizing institutional adoption. So when we start looking at electric vehicle, Ashim, my worry is we only look at the consumer aspect. How many people can we get on the road to start adopting EVs? We also need to look at how states, governments, the aerospace, the aviation industry, and public transportation, which you so lucidly outlined, is far from adequate. So if you can look at more electric vehicles, which are also getting a push from the government side of it, you can take the load off the streets. And better design and socio-economic integration of design with consumer participation. So the worry is, will my battery last for about 4 to 5 years? Are we looking at technologies that can make these batteries last for upwards of 10 years so that you're giving the return on the vehicle, and which is making this option sustainable? So we've also got consumer and anecdotal evidence where they say cities like Bangalore, like Pune, that are readying their infrastructure. When we ask for policy recommendations, we're saying, you know, GST going up to 12% on batteries, and then looking at 28%. You know, these are tax slabs which are not sustainable. So when we believe in a sector, we also say treat it like a sunrise sector and then start putting your money where your mouth is. So from policy incentives, can we start looking at rationalization of taxes? Also from the consumer adoption perspective, we'll have to look at planning our cities better. So will there be a special lane that will give you access to EVs? Younger people adopting EVs much faster, so easier processes of licensing, discounted rates on parking. If we're trying to ease out our cities in terms of transportation, can we look at that? And I want to rest my intervention at the fact that we are only looking at batteries as a model for sustaining cars. So if we were to look at utilizing solar power, wind energies, which would also reduce the cost, because we must not forget, friends, that electricity is auctioned at 4 a.m. every morning. So we can't be looking at a more expensive proposition and reaffirming our commitment to climate. So we at the YGI remain committed to this cause, and we'd be very happy to take this conversation further with all our colleagues. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Subi, for laying it out very well from a macro perspective. Since you mentioned about, you know, the numbers coming in and this becoming more and more popular, I think I would like to take this question over to Mr. Rahul Bharti. Since Maruti Suzuki sells, every second car that's sold in the country is from Maruti Suzuki, but we haven't heard of any electric vehicles, any commercial launch of electric vehicles from Maruti Suzuki so far. So I'd like to know from you, what is your thinking on this? Because it's widely understood that unless Maruti gets into this game, how do we have electric vehicles all over the roads in the country?
Thanks, Ashim. Is my voice audible? Yeah. I think, thanks for that introduction. Every second vehicle from in India coming from Maruti Suzuki, but that also carries a lot of responsibility within itself. I think when a player like Maruti, which is a mass market player, wants to get into a new technology, and which obviously has its own paradigm, and it's a change of a century, there are two things which we have to be extremely mindful of. First is scale. Whatever Maruti does, it does with scale. It has to cover the whole of India, urban, rural, every part of India. It has to cover a wide range of usage patterns, customer profiles. One is scale, the other is sustainability. So unless any investment stands these two fire tests, further deliberation and research needs to be done so that these two conditions are met. And you might not have heard about it, but we are going to launch our own set of EVs by the year 2020. We want that they pick up scale. We want that they be absorbed all over India. And they are a sustainable proposition. Sustainable means we do not have sudden gaps in viability and the program, stops halfway saying this is not viable, or either I'm not making profit, or the consumer shuns it halfway for lack of charging, etc. So to address these two challenges, what we want to do is cover the whole 360-degree of ownership cycle of EVs. And when we say that, the biggest in EV, of course, is the is the advanced battery. Today, it's lithium-ion technology. So local manufacturing of components of EV is a prime pillar on which this whole program rests. The moment we say local manufacturing, we also have to locate sources of lithium, cobalt, and other advanced materials that go into it. So globally, we have to secure supplies of these raw materials. Along with our parent, Suzuki Motor Corporation in Japan, we are trying to do that. We are putting up India's first lithium-ion battery manufacturing plant. And when I say battery manufacturing, it is at the cell level. It's not that we will import cells and we'll assemble them and make an advanced battery. We will have cell-level localization in India. The site has been selected in Gujarat. We'll have that. The next aspect that scalability needs is that your entire dealer network has to be geared up to meet such a challenge. So all our dealer sales and servicemen have to be skilled to understand how high voltage products are to be handled. Of course, after the dealership, when the customer gets the car, it is charging infrastructure. We have to get into, we'll have to think of getting into some kind of charging support ourselves if our customers have to be given that confidence. Charging is a very, very unknown kind of phenomena as of now. Our effort will be that people come to public fast chargers. They should need to come to public fast chargers at the bare minimum, and they should have a solution in their own home. So a long charging, as Dr. Subi just mentioned, is actually not that bad. If a person has a solution to charge it from his own home, it is the most scalable option. Of course, to give consumers further confidence, we will also need fast chargers at public places, but we have to be mindful of the fact that they'll need a lot of space. If, for example, 10 or 20 cars line up, you'll have a road jam, you'll have society backlash on congestion, etc. That has to be avoided. So charging infrastructure is the next. And the last and the most critical is safe handling of lithium and recycling. At least a company like Maruti will not put a lithium-ion battery product into the market if it does not have a robust system of taking it back from the system. We have to be careful about the fact that a lithium battery is like a moving bomb. And accidents have happened sporadically in different parts of the world. Any such accident can be very negative for consumer sentiment. So all these aspects, we'll have a 360-degree view of things. We want to scale up and go in a sustainable manner. Of course, there are some policy recommendations that can help. The first thing is for scalability, we have to understand that 3/4 of Indian passenger vehicles are in the smaller category, either below, let's say what the traditional definition we have, say below 4 meters, or let's say below a particular price point, something like 5 or 6 lakh rupees. Now the GST difference between an IC engine car and an EV is much less for smaller cars than it is for bigger cars. The differential that small cars get is only about 17%, For big cars, it is upward of 30 to 35%. So the viability pressures are much more when you try to electrify smaller cars than what they are for bigger cars. So that is one challenge we as collectively as CM, Society of Indian Auto Manufacturers, we're trying to address. We are in dialogue with the government. And of course, the government has set a strong communication. They have generated a strong environment. And we have very, ambitious, I have entrepreneurs on both my sides, very ambitious, very visionary gentlemen who will take this forward along with us. So I think we can reconnect at a later time.
Sure, sure. Thank you very much for sharing that 360-degree, all-encompassing perspective on electric vehicles. And I think you've raised some very pertinent points, and I would take the panelists' sort of views on the same. But to begin with, I think I'll go over to Mr. Mahesh Babu, who's been running an electric car company for a fairly long time in India, and we do see the Mahindra E2O vehicles on the roads in many of our cities. So in your view, how much of the vehicle has been indigenized already, and going forward, what steps do you think could be taken to increase this make in India of electric vehicles?
First, I'll cover Ashim, some of the points which is raised by Subi and my friend Rahul, who has raised it. I think first we'll have to understand why we are talking so much of EV. I think that's the most primary question. And what are all the challenges faced? Mahindra have been always committed to sustainable mobility in a way that we always believe the technology should create a value to a customer, and it should solve a societal problems. It is not for the sake of technology we want to push it to customers, nor we want only customers to buy for the sake it's a technology. So we have to use technology innovatively to create value to customers and solve a societal problem. Today we have a serious problem of urban mobility. You talked about it. So if you take today on technology, the next best method of moving without creating local pollution, okay, of course the best method is by walk, which is being done by when we are born. I think we talked about it, how cities have to encourage pedestrians, respect pedestrians, and when you want to do that, the next best way is to not to create any local pollution because you are living there. And EV plays a very vital role in moving out the pollution, even though it's some percentage in the cities right now to go away. So we have started our journey in electric from, let's say, 2004, when we made our first Bijli electric three-wheeler, gave it to in the Vaishno Devi, and then we have been strongly believing in investing in electric. So we have a traditional business, and then we said we want to innovate something new, which is to create value to customers and to the society, and that's how we believed EV is the way out. So we invested in 2010, Chetan is here on Reva, and then we took forward the electric journey here. Now we have about 5 products in India, and all the 5 products are related to having mass adoption of electric vehicle, not something which the wealthy and healthy would like to use it for over a period of time. So, and hence, we believe that it is the way that EV is well integrated into a urban society. It will solve many of our mobility problems of the urban society. So we are the first movers, we are the pioneers, and we have some responsibility. So I have to answer what Rahul has said, how critical it is for safety. We have run about 70 million electric kilometers in India. I think others are just coming in, but over a period of decade, without any major safety issues. So one of the biggest challenges while we say handling technology comes with a challenge, a risk, and an opportunity. So when we went to mobile, there are a lot of talks about how it will impact our life, but reality is it has advantages, it has disadvantages. You should make sure the disadvantages are not taking over the advantages and creating a negative value to the customers. I'm happy to share with Rahul that we have run about 70 million plus kilometers without any safety issue, and we do about 1,500 tests on safety. So when we give it to customers a product which is affordable or valuable, it doesn't mean that it is not tested or it is not done in a global way. So today, if you ask me, rest assured, lithium-ion batteries are not a bomb. It is a good toy to play with known people. Technologies are available to control it, handle it, and make sure it is giving you value than any threat of any way. The second one, what I'm saying is, while we say indigenization, I think we'll have to see what India stands and why it is important that we get into this journey and why we believe that we get into the journey. You can say, okay, EV has to, this has to be solved, that has to be solved, charging has to be solved, and then I will embrace. Then what's going to happen is you're going to be behind the world. See the rate at which China is growing on electric, see the rate at which Europe is going, see the rate at which others are going. India traditionally has a challenge of following Europe, Japan on technology, on automobile. This is the only chance India can take a lead in technology if we embrace electric. So it's not only going to solve the technological problem, it is also create a lead in technology equal to developed markets, and hence electric is one of the way an industry can embrace and become globally competitive, an Indian auto industry. This is the way I think, and Mahindra thinks this way. And hence, if we don't do now, you're going to again follow. You have been following for 100 years, you want to continue to follow 100 years, we can continue to do that. Nothing is going to be lost. But opportunity is lost if we don't do it rightly, and if we don't do it the way others are doing right now. And hence, there is a responsibility lies on in the industry, everybody. Of course, there is a challenge. When we take any new technology, there will be challenges. As a pioneers, we need to break the challenge. Of course, range anxiety is a challenge. Charging infrastructure is a challenge. And we have been constantly working with stakeholders, including government, partners, everybody, to see how we can do it. How can we charge? How can we swap batteries? How can we bring in new areas and look at segments where it can be made viable? Look at two-wheeler segment, look at three-wheeler segment. Mahindra is the only company present from two-wheelers till buses in India. So our responsibility lies when we talk electric, it's not going to be talking about electric cars alone. While we have products now on electric cars, we have been constantly working on products from three-wheelers, two-wheelers in the US, three-wheelers here, till the electric buses. And hence, if you look at three-wheeler segment, there is a very high possibility that we can get to electric, not even wait till 2030. It can happen in next 5 years. Because economically, an electric three-wheeler can give higher returns, or the investment versus returns are proportional, or in fact better when compared to other segments. So, and today India is going with metros, many infrastructures are coming, and last mile is a big challenge. So if electric three-wheelers are coming, there is a very high possibility that you will bring pollution down in the cities and also make the last mile very sustainable way. Look at fleet segments, what's happening in shared mobility. Right now when we talk about cars, we talk only about personal owned cars, but look at what's happening with Olas, Ubers and shared mobility. The shared mobility percentages keep on increasing on the fleet of vehicles. And shared mobility run a car more than an individual run on a per day basis, which makes it viable economical sense for running an electric vehicle, because operating cost of electric vehicles are lower while the acquisition cost is higher. So we are focusing not just on making products, so we are tying up with Olas, Ubers to make sure and work with them, partners like them, to make sure electric is understood. They run them, and now almost over a period of 2 to 3 years, all the partners have understood, yes, electric vehicles will make economic sense if I run more than 150 to 200 kilometers a day. So any new technology comes, it needs an intervention and change of scenario of stakeholders and partners, and many new startups are coming. They want to work with us. Chetan will of course talk about what he is doing, and the complete mobility when it is getting disrupted, the conventional way of thinking is not going to give a solution in which the problem we have created in our mindset. So something will disrupt, and that's what we are saying, that electric mobility with stakeholders of swapping, charging, and the urban challenges India is facing is going to create a new opportunity for new business models, and hence mobility will do a difference. Coming to your point of localization, we always believe that technology has to be made globally competitive, but made locally to create enough jobs. So more than 50% of our value creation is already local. The battery packs, except the cell, what Rahul said, already is being localized here, and we have plans to see how do we do local content of cells in the future. Again, here we need to create a partnerships because one volume of us is going to not create enough value on putting up a cell plant, and hence we can always partner who is on somebody who is investing on cells, which we are open to, and that's the way you will create. If India is going to have the second largest EV market by 2030, based on what is being talked about, when the demand is there, technology will be there, manufacturing will be there, skill level will be there. Once the demand is seen, investment will automatically come from industry. Only industry will look at stable policies, will look at stable tax structures, so that we will be able to predict clearly with a small variation or with acceptable variation and invest on what we need to do. So to me, it is a good start. Lot more to do, but it is exciting times which will create some value for not only us, for the next generation, how they have to sustainably live in urban cities.
Thank you very much for sharing both your journey and how also talking about the 70 million kilometers that you've driven electric vehicles in the country, and also what sort of experiences you have had along the path. Thank you. So with that, I would like to move to Mr. Vikram Gilardi. Now, Toyota with the Prius probably being the most successful electrified model in the globe. You've seen this happen in many countries, how the Prius adoption increased, how you could locally make it. And so, if you could share some of those experiences, and also if Toyota is thinking of bringing a low-cost hybrid solution for India.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity. As I start to answer your question, actually this journey of electrification that Toyota actually started with an electric vehicle. It was RA4 way back in 1992, etc. Of course, we then shifted to hybrids because of obvious challenges that existed for adoption of electric vehicles at that time. Journey has been quite challenging and quite successful. Today, cumulatively, we have in excess of 11.5 million electrified vehicles sold globally, which is 43% of all electrified vehicles globally. That makes Toyota the largest single OEM in the space of electrified vehicles. Of course, for the benefit of the audience, when I talk about electrified vehicles, I'm talking about the full range of technologies that fall under the family of electric vehicles. This includes the hybrid electric vehicle, the plug-in electric vehicle, the battery electric vehicle, and also the hydrogen vehicle or the fuel cell electric vehicle. The difference being that in hybrid you have two power sources. The ICE engine remains, which supplements the battery, and it gives you very, very high levels of efficiency and fuel savings. And of course, the degree of electrification increases as you go from HEV all the way to hydrogen. Now, because it's a family of technologies, below the surface, the three core technologies, that is the motor, the controllers, and the batteries, are common. So what we use perhaps in different models of hybrids is, in terms of motors and batteries, is the same stuff that goes in for Mirai, which is the largest selling hydrogen fuel cell car globally. Of course, the volumes are very small because it's prohibitively expensive right now. Now, as far as your specific question about hybrid vehicles, Toyota has in its staple a full range of hybrid and electrified vehicles, from compact vehicles to very large vehicles. And we do have strong commitment from our future plans in terms of going in this direction of electrification in a much, much more aggressive way. However, as far as India is concerned, the question is, we're just starting out on the journey of electrification. While other countries like US or Europe or Japan have traversed this journey for the last 10, 15 years. When they started out, they also started out by supporting the full range of electric vehicles. And as the markets matured, they saw that the hybrids became economically viable on their own. Therefore, they needn't require any kind of incentives or support globally. However, this is not the case in the nascent phase we are in India. Today, if you look at it, for the entire range of electrified vehicles, whether it's a hybrid or an electric, one of the biggest stumbling blocks is the price issue, the cost to the customer. And Indian customer, as you know, is very price sensitive. I think Maruti will agree, kitna deti hai, kitna price hai, that is, first thing that the customer talks about. So when the customer is making that decision about buying anything, he's not only got the price equation for the decision making, he's got it in terms of deciding the cost over the life cycle, the total cost of ownership. And that's how smart the Indian consumer is. And one example to illustrate this is few years back, Delhi NCR saw 73% of sales happening by diesel, although diesel was a couple of lakhs more expensive. And that was because the consumer could figure out that it makes sense for him to recover this extra money in a few years. So ROI is a few years and TCO is positive. However, the TCO for most of the electrified vehicles in India right now is not positive. And that's one of the main stumbling blocks. Others obviously being issues of charging, etc., for pure electric. Now, if you have to start this journey and also make in India and go into volumes, do it in a sustainable way, you really have to look at localization at a much, much deeper level in terms of not only assemblies, sub-assemblies, but parts thereof. And now, that will happen only if you get volumes. Now, here is the problem, classic problem of chicken and egg. So you have a vicious cycle that you've got trapped because volumes are not there, the prices don't come down, so it doesn't pick up, and it goes round and round. So how do you break this vicious cycle? One way to break it, especially in terms of four-wheelers, is to support electrified vehicles, all technologies, to the extent of viability gap and to the extent that they benefit the society. And what do I mean by benefit the society? Very simple. Why are we talking about electric vehicles today? It's not just for fun. We're talking about electrified vehicles for primarily the government looks at it from a point of view of energy security, reducing fossil fuel imports. We as society also look at it from a point of view of emissions, carbon intensity, and another very, very important part of it all is manufacturing in India, job creation, contribution to the economy. So if you have to figure out all these four pieces and not trade off between one and the other, the only pathway that's viable and sustainable for you is, like I said in the beginning, the policies have to differentiate between traditional petrol diesel vehicles and electrified vehicles and give a certain level of taxation or other incentive to make it viable for the consumer to pick up. And as this viability increases, volumes will come not only from, let's say, hybrids, it'll come from PHEVs, electrics, and they all add up. It actually helps speed up pure electric vehicle sales. So I mean, wherever I go, I say it's a misnomer when people try to say, oh, it's hybrid versus electric. That's never the case. They're part of the same family. It can never be hybrid versus electric. Hybrid actually complements electrics. PHEV complements electrics. And what it is actually against is ICE. I'll just quote a report from BCG which has come out recently. They did scenario analysis on what will be the fossil fuel saving like in 2030 under different scenarios. One scenario is you have 20% electric vehicle penetration, rest 80 is ICE, that is your petrol and diesel. The fossil fuel savings in the four-wheeler space is 4%. Now, if this 2080 becomes 2050 and 30, 50 being plug-ins and hybrids, suddenly your fossil fuel saving goes up from 4% to 10%, 2.5 times. Another scenario, what if it is 30% BEV and 70% the balance, 40 and 60. 40 and 60 electric and ICE, then the scenario, in this scenario, it is 7%, which is less than the earlier scenario. Final scenario they looked at was, what if it's a 40-60, meaning 40% is pure electric and 60% certain degree of other electrified vehicles, hybrids, etc. Then the amount of savings that you're having is more than 2 times, that's around 15%. So I think the policymakers have also got to look at the entire issue not from one particular technology or what is to be supported, not to be supported. There are very serious trade-offs. And when we talk about trade-offs, one example I can give you is, right now, if you look at the local manufacturing ecosystem for electric parts and components, hardly exists. It's all imported from China. And if you look at the degree of localization on the petrol diesel side, India is globally amongst the most competitive markets for auto components. The contribution to the economy is around 7 to 8%. Now, you don't want to lose that. Neither do you want to say, I don't want to do electric. You want both. If you want both, the trade-off for you is to try and achieve a pathway which allows you to have both and not lose one because of the other. And it seems like an impossible task, but it is not. It's only how you proceed ahead and how you place your policy and what pathway that you take. Globally, other than China, all countries have taken a stepwise approach which has allowed the local ecosystem to grow, both from a supply side, also from the charging infrastructure side, because charging infrastructure doesn't come overnight. It takes time. It's not just about setting up charging stations, it's also about augmenting your transmission and distribution network. Our transformers today, do they have the enough gap to fill the sudden spike in demand from electric vehicle offtake if it was to happen at a very fast pace? I'm afraid not, because the spread of these electric vehicles will be determined by demographics. And your more affluent neighborhoods will have the propensity to having many more electrified vehicles than some other neighborhoods. It's a challenge, but it's not something that cannot be overcome. It can be overcome. It can be overcome by commitment from the government and also supporting business opportunities for people to come and do this. There are innovative solutions, and I think Chetan is here, he'll be talking about one of it. So my submission is yes, we would be bringing it in, we would be interested, but we would like that policy is made in a manner which is going to make this shift to electric, that is electrification, sustainable. And sustainable in a manner that the value addition happens in India. It's not supported by mere imports and assembly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Gulati, for sharing that global perspective and also, sharing that vision of how electrification in general can be much, much more useful for the country. I think the Siam white paper also that came out had mention of this topic. Now we've heard a global perspective, we've heard a macro perspective, we've heard an Indian perspective, and we know there are some problems also out there when we have to move to electrification. So now I would move on to somebody whose name is synonymous with electric mobility in India, Mr. Chetan Maini, and his company, Sun Mobility, has come up with a solution that addresses two very important problems. One of the higher cost when a battery and vehicle come together. He's been able to decouple that with a swapping system and also reducing the charging times, by keeping readily swappable batteries there at all the swapping stations. So I'd like to understand from you, with this solution out there, we see that many products that are coming out are still coming with a fixed battery in them and not a swappable battery. So how can we increase the penetration of this solution? And is it as applicable in passenger vehicles also as it is in commercial vehicles where the owner of the car is somebody else and how he maintains the battery, etc., is very different? And lastly, because I may not have too much time, so I would also add this in the same question, would also like to know your experience here over the years that you've been in this field for a very, very long time in India. How has it been for you, and what do you think would happen in future?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think that I want to set a very important context. Today's headlines in the newspaper was about reducing the taxes on oil. And I think it's important that today our infrastructure in the country is being hampered because of what we look at our import bill and how important it is to cut that down at a very fast pace as we look at it. The other interesting area is that at 2 rupees 50 paisa per unit of renewable energy between wind and solar that's come out in the last year, the cost of renewable energy for the first time in the history is cheaper than gasoline equivalent, which means if we fix prices today, for the next 10 years, there is no increase that you're going and seeing on this area. The third aspect on this point is that if India is really looking at even going all electric by 2030, you need approximately 260 gigawatts of renewable energy to power the entire nation. The country is looking at 300 by that year on this area. And that's around 0.5% of Rajasthan covered by solar panels that would actually empower the entire country. So here we're on a mission where in 10 years we could be energy independent, power entire surface transportation by renewable energy, be cheaper than gasoline and have no impact on our price point. So I think this is a very large portion of what I think can happen on this area at a very macro level. Now, having worked in electrics for 20 years, I think that while the cost of energies while technology has come down rapidly, has improved rapidly, there's been 3 key challenges, and they've all come across through conversations that we've had here. The first is high cost of vehicles. The second is the long refueling time. And the third is range anxiety. And unless you fundamentally address these 3 issues, you're not going to see large-scale growth on this area. And as Ashim rightly pointed out, by separating batteries from vehicles, even today, you can get electric vehicles to be cost neutral to gasoline equivalents at reasonable volumes. I'm not talking of 10, 50, 100, but in reasonable volumes that you can get there. You can get a 2-wheeler, a 3-wheeler, a car, or a bus to be cost neutral. If you look at the cost of renewable energy and the cost of battery amortization, you can get the cost of operation to be cheaper than gasoline equivalent today on any form of transportation. This is without subsidies at reasonable volume, right? So this is good. And then if you look at swapping out in a couple of minutes, you address range anxiety completely. You address the issue that what happens to my battery after 5 years? What happens when I'm driving at 45 degrees in Delhi ambient temperatures, and how long my battery will last? So you actually have really good solutions today that can actually make an impact in any form of transportation. The other thing we need to understand is, I come from Bangalore, and an analysis we did there, 45% of the people in Bangalore, 47% travel by buses every day. And 45% travel by 2- and 3-wheelers. So 90% of the population of a city travels in 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, and buses. What solutions are we going to create for this 90% of population, which is actually cost effective, where we can, and sustainable in a way? And as in a country where we think about it, while I build car companies and have been part of it, and I think they're a very important part of the ecosystem, we also need to think with a country that's looking at shared mobility and how a large portion of our people are going to use that, what are solutions we're going to create there? And when you go to solutions like this, they have to be open architecture. When you go to solutions like this, from day one, they need to be sustainable by themselves. And that's where I believe swapping comes very easily. We showcase solutions for buses, where in 2.5 minutes, we can swap a bus battery in and out, which means that every 2 to 4 hours of driving, you swap it and continue to use it. You reduce the battery weight of a typical bus from 3 tons to probably 600 kg. You can carry 40 people more in a bus, which is very essential, instead of carrying 2.5 tons. Your cost of amortization of battery is much lower. You actually get cost neutrality, and you have a win-win situation. When we think of 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers, now in the case of bus, it's quite easy to, because most bus platforms are very similar, not just in India, worldwide. So the space for the battery, the size of it, everything is easy to manage. And already a lot of OEMs are coming together to see how we create an India standard to allow a common system to be used. And this is an industry-driven thought process around this area. On the second side, we looked at two-wheelers and three-wheelers. We've created one solution for two and three-wheelers. Around 20 million being sold every year could have one solution. You can use one battery, 2 or 3 batteries, depending how much range you want, how much performance you want. The switch happens in 1 minute. And we've studied over 100 products, and we created one solution that can fit around 100 products in the country today to say that this could be completely open and customizable. So it's standardized because it can be used in any area, in any platform, any station. But it's customizable because when you put it in any vehicle, it aligns to that vehicle. It knows it's in a two-wheeler, it performs a particular way. It knows it's a three-wheeler, it performs in a different way. So you're creating standardization, but at the same time, you're creating customization. So coming to your point of where I see this, I think in two and three-wheelers and buses, I see swapping and shared mobility coming in very quickly. Also, the form factors are such that allow easy integration. Almost every three-wheeler looks similar, and most two-wheelers have, scooters have space under the seat, which is very similar. So it allows you to have an easy way to integrate it, right? Coming to cars, I think it's more challenging, but it's very doable. And I think solutions will coexist. You'll have people who just go home and plug in. You'll have some people who use fast charging. But if you think of broad range shared mobility, I think swapping will play a very large role there, right? If you're an Ola Uber driver and you had to go to the airport and you got a call and you had 45 kilometers range on your battery, and to the airport, at least in Bangalore, it gets you off in 60 kilometers, you're going to lose your ride. The next day, you'll turn your car in and say, I don't want it, because the other option is stopping on the way for 45 minutes to charge or an hour to fast charge. But if you could swap your batteries in 2.5 minutes, you as a driver won't mind, and the passenger behind you won't mind, right? So you truly address this range anxiety. That may be very different than a person who's going to work and coming back doing 40 kilometers a day. He might as well plug it in home. So what we've got to think is that technologies are going to coexist. The technologies for shared mobility are going to be different from that of personal mobility, right? So as a country, where do we see this going? I think it's very important that the vision is set right. We see that when government said 100 gigawatts of solar to 2022 had to be done, policies were set right, investments came in, the whole industry moved, and you've seen in 4 to 5 years, the impact we've seen. If that similar thing is done, I think that will give the right impetus for the industry to come through. The second part is technology is going to change rapidly. Policy should ensure that they're technology agnostic. Let them promote all types of technologies, make sure the best succeed. There will be different technologies for different solutions and for different form factors, and they're likely to change over in the next 5 years. So I think if these come in, the industry is going to step up and make it happen. But these two things will be big drivers from the government perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chetan Maini, for sharing that. And since we're just running out of time, but I would very quickly request the panelists to also say what would be the 2 things you would want to ask the government to do to make this happen. Maybe we could start with Mr. Mahesh Babu and then move on.
I would say that what government is right now doing on electric mobility program, it should continue for a longer period. Keep the policy stable so that the industry can look at stable policy and go, and that's the first one I will do. Second one, we have to promote a lot of new ideas in this area, like what we talked about, swapping, new investors on charging and so on and so forth. So I think we are in the right path. If we continue to do what the transformative mobility report came from Niti Aayog is continued for next few years, I think India will be in the right path.
Thank you. Mr. Rahul Bharti.
I would agree with the first part, which is stability of policy. It helps, plan your investments and which technology to look at. The second big thing, I would agree with Mr. Vikram Gilardi. He said, when we talk about the family of all electrified vehicles, there is a very big advantage that we incur. That advantage is, since all these technologies essentially use the same parts, the motor, the lithium-ion battery, the electronics, it can actually make India a big powerhouse in local manufacturing. So all such technologies need to be encouraged, and that will help stop imports and build local manufacturing, and actually will be the most, it will accelerate electric mobility the most also. Because the moment we are able to manufacture all of these in India, the cost hurdle for pure electric vehicles also comes down significantly. Thanks.
Well, we've already covered a lot, but one specific thing it's important that as policies change, there's uniformity. So I see one anomaly right now is at the GST level, where batteries come in at 28%, vehicles are at 12%. So if you were to manufacture them separately and supply them, they'd be at a higher level. If you were to probably lease them, they would be at a different level. If you were to put them in a vehicle, they'd be at a different level. So that's going to become a challenge as you think of multiple policies. So I think it's something that the government's aware of, and I think they're working on it, but it's still probably an open issue.
Thank you. Mr. Gulati.
I think the government needs to be technology agnostic to allow innovation to happen, to allow flexibility in wake of rapid technological changes. And second is domestic capacity enhancement. Without that, nothing much will happen.
All right. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all the participants for sharing their views on this. And we had a very good discussion. Thanks to them. Also, thank the audience for a patient hearing this afternoon. Thank you very much.
With this, we come to an end of the session. I thank all my speakers for their valuable remarks and my audience for their patient listening. May I please request my moderator, Mr. Sharma, to hand over the token of appreciation to all the speakers. And all the audience are requested to join us for the next session in another 15 minutes. We'll be breaking for tea outside only. Please join us for tea. I would request Mr. Puneet from EI Group to hand over the token of appreciation to Mr. Sharma as well. Audience, please leave the feedback form on your chairs. We'll collect them later. You are requested to leave the feedback forms there only.